you know, if the world was the doll, I think you wouldn't want to stay long in it. You can sometimes imagine when you're in there that is the world, and then you remember when you get out to talk to normal people, like the people here or on the street, that actually it isn't the world. And you know, maybe that's part of the problem. But today was a particularly extreme example of that, because you had what I think most ordinary people would say is a totally unreal situation, where a government that is supposed to represent in a democratic fashion the majority or all of the citizens go out to bat in the most extraordinary way, not for those citizens, and for monies that could utterly transform the lives of those citizens in a truly dramatic way, but instead go out to bat for one of the wealthiest corporations in the world that really nobody disputes was engaged in the most extraordinary level of tax evasion imaginable. I mean, the government may debate, and did debate, the extent to which they facilitated it, right? And the extent to which, therefore, the EU ruling is fair or unfair to them. But what is absolutely not at issue at all is that Apple have engaged in a level of tax evasion on a global level that is truly staggering in its proportions. Really the 13 billion is just the tip of a very, very big iceberg. And of course we shouldn't even say 13 billion, because with interest it's 19 billion, and that doesn't account for the other companies that engaged in precisely the same practices in this country. A select group, it's important to say, because this wasn't available and isn't available, this tax treatment to any ordinary worker, obviously, or to small and medium enterprise in this country, but this was a select group of people for whom different tax rules, or effectively no tax rules, applied when it came to the extraordinary profits that they were generating out of companies that were registered here in Ireland. And the government and Fianna Fáil and the Labour Party and some of the independents, so-called, in the government, and some even outside the government, go into bat for these people and say, no, we want Apple to be able to keep this money. We want to ensure that all the tax they evaded, they should keep. And that is pretty extraordinary. I mean, some of the comparators, if you like, of what this money could have done are pretty staggering in themselves. With 13 billion, never mind the 19 billion, you could build over 80,000 council houses. So there is the money to solve the housing and homelessness crisis. For every billion euro, according to very mainstream economic thinkers and experts and so on in this country, for every billion euro you can create 10,000 jobs. 10,000 jobs. So for 19 billion you could create 190,000 jobs. So that is the sort of thing, you know, the money is in fact it's larger than the education budget, it's the equivalent of the health budget. So this is the money we're talking about, but the government doesn't want it. And is out fighting, as we speak, and has been fighting all day with the support of Fianna Fáil and the Labour Party, saying, no, we don't want this money. Now, that's bad enough. But then just to say, for the record, if you like, was it the case that they just sort of didn't know what was happening, weren't directly involved in this? And that has been their argument today, is that Apple, if you like, may have exploited what they call mismatches between the different tax codes of different countries, but they can't be held responsible for that. They taxed Apple for what Apple did in Ireland, but were in no way a party to a major tax avoidance scheme. That is just absolute lies. Absolute lies. and they talked about the integrity of the Irish tax system. As Kieran Allen pointed out to us the other day, and I mentioned this in the debate today, the first tax ruling that's at the centre of this scandal that was broken last week was in 1991 during the period of the Ansbacher accounts. And if you remember back to that, this was a scheme which had been started in the 1970s, and it happened all under the auspices primarily of Charlie Haughey, where the Irish rich put money in Cayman Island accounts, but they were actually based here in Dublin. Right? They were offshore accounts, not liable to any tax. Nobody knew how much they were in there, but they were based here in Dublin. This first was revealed in the early 1990s, and it took a huge public uproar for there eventually to be a tribunal to look into it. Revenue only started to investigate it in 1999, right? About 30 years after it had started. So the idea that Revenue or some sort of honest professional body that aren't in any way influenced by the political culture that might have been created by gangsters like Charlie Haughey and the sort of corruption and tax evasion that he was overseeing, and that they weren't influenced in their failure to pursue the Ansbacher Bank account holders is nonsense. And we know that from our own recent history. The second ruling, the 2007 ruling, and again this was, it was couched in sort of cover-up type language in the document we got from the government last night. And it's important to say, they won't show us the European Union Commission ruling, the details of this, so we have a sham debate in there about all this without actually access to the information or to the tax rulings that allowed Apple to do it. But as I put forward in the debate today, and it was something that we managed to wheedle out of the Department of Finance in the Finance Committee in 2013, was that they're following the ruling of 2007. These rulings, just so you understand, is where Apple meet with Revenue and say, we'd like you to calculate our tax in this way. Now just think about that for a start, right? Do any of you get the opportunity to go into Revenue and say, we'd like you to calculate our tax in a particular way? No, right? That is not available to the vast majority of citizens, and they pursue you to the extent of even taking money out of your banking or out of your social welfare, your wages, if you don't pay property taxes. We've seen the lengths to which they've gone to try and make people pay water charges. They just take your PAYE taxes out of your pocket and so on. They'll pursue the self-employed or any small and medium enterprise. But in the case of Apple, Apple went in 1991 and again in 2007 and says, this is how we'd like you to calculate our taxes on the enormous profits we're generating in the 7 companies. It says it all, even the fact that they have 7 companies registered here. Why do you need 7 companies? Other than the fact that you're creating an elaborate structure in order to shift profits around, hide them, and then siphon them off so you don't have to pay any tax on them, and Revenue obliged. So that in the 2 years following that ruling, the amount of write-down, tax write-down, that a select number of companies got increased by a staggering 16 billion per year, and then up to about 19 billion per year. And then that figure stays more or less static from 2008 onwards up until 2014, and maybe beyond, because in fact, despite claims by the government that the double Irish mechanism, that they that allowed these companies to move profits from one company that was liable for tax to another company that was still in Ireland but apparently wasn't liable for tax and was tax residents nowhere, that mechanism is still in existence. Because they specifically said, although we're planning to get rid of it, we're going to allow the companies that have availed of it to date, avail of it up until 2020. So they can still do this, and probably are still doing it. At which point, they're going to bring in another thing called a patent box, which will allow them to do the same thing in a different way. So this is what's going on, but for each one of those years, you are talking about approximately 20 billion euro that was just taken off the top of the profits of about 10 or 12 or maybe 20 companies, moved outside the tax jurisdiction and not taxed at all, which would have been 2 or 3 billion euro extra a year in revenue. And don't forget, this happened in 2007. The same year, the Irish economy crashed, and so when we were being absolutely battered with cuts in pay, our hospital and housing budgets, our education budgets being slashed, our kids, the disabled, single mothers, pensioners, you name it, public servants, hundreds of thousands of people losing their jobs, what, 250,000 people forced to leave the country. When all of this is happening, they are getting revenue is helping them avoid even more tax, a dramatic increase in the amount of tax they are allowed to avoid. They've been doing it before then because of the 1991 ruling, but it jumps by a massive amount in the aftermath of this decision made in 2007. It's quite extraordinary. So it is literally, it's not, what this demonstrates, it's when we say there's one law for the rich and there's one law for the rest of us, this is the starkest concrete proof of that's how it works. When everybody else is suffering, these guys are not suffering at all, but are getting richer and richer and richer, and it is being done with the active collusion of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour and the tax authorities. And I also pointed out in the debate today that when we try to blow the whistle on this, and ask that Apple, Google and Facebook would be brought in to the Finance Committee to answer questions about this in 2013. Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour and Independents voted that motion down, but even more extraordinary, and I was even shocked, and I'm rarely shocked at the extent to these people will go to protect the vested interests, but they actually moved a motion before our motion was debated and voted upon to switch off the cameras. Normally speaking, anything that happens in the Dáil is filmed and is available for any member of the public to do. They, in an unprecedented move, I've never ever seen it in the Dáil before, a Labour Party chairperson of that committee proposed that the cameras be switched off, and Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour fell in line and voted to switch the cameras off. So there will be no public record of the discussions that happened over why we weren't going to bring Google and Facebook in. And then they try and turn around today and say, we didn't know anything about this. Well, why did you turn off the cameras then? Why did you not bring them in for questioning? Same way as they've been brought in, even in the American Senate. Hardly a bastion of radical leftism, right? Or the British Parliament. Even there they could do it, right? But in Ireland, no. So craven were these to the Irish political establishment, to these guys, they wouldn't even allow a debate about possibly bringing them in for questioning on this level of tax evasion. Absolutely extraordinary, right? So that is how rotten the Irish political establishment are. And I think we need to really understand that. And the contrast between that, how they have treated the rich, and you can add to that list the vulture funds who have now bought up all the distressed property, the repossessed homes, and who are now the ones responsible for the worst housing and homelessness crisis in the city. They have got even more control. They have been given more tax breaks in recent years to avoid paying tax on their ill-gotten gains of stuff they got from NAMA for virtually nothing. Stuff that was not made available to the 140,000 people now on the housing list, or the 2,000 kids who are homeless on our streets. That is what is going on. It is absolutely shocking, and on a global level, it is this same kind of practice. It's not just Ireland, which is the single largest contributory factor to the staggering growth in poverty, deprivation, and wealth inequality that has gone through the roof in the last 20 or 30 years. It is these companies who are responsible for that, and the governments and the political establishment that have facilitated their activities. And it is also one of the key reasons why our global economy is so unstable. Because if a small number of people decide everything, and their decisions are based on, one, we're not going to contribute a single cent if we can help it, to sustain the infrastructure, the education system, the housing that people need. We don't want to contribute anything to that. And they move their money around at will. How dangerous and volatile and unstable does that make the global economy? If you want the simple answer as to why the world economy is in so much trouble, is so unstable, is so vulnerable to shocks, it is the fact that these small group of people, accountable to nobody, who have governments held hostage, have this level of power and nobody wants to challenge it. And I'll just conclude on that point. We want to challenge it. And we believe it is possible. And that's the important thing I want to stress. Because I think most people kind of have a sense of this. They don't maybe know all of the details, but they can see the injustice, they can see the hardship that arises from it, but often the sense is, but can you ever really do anything about it? Can you ever beat these people? And I believe that you can. I think even the fact that we've got to this level of expose is precisely because of the rage and anger that has been expressed across Europe over the austerity of the last 7 or 8 years, that we saw manifest on the streets with the water charges movement, that we saw with the massive resistance, the still ongoing resistance in Greece and Spain and Portugal to austerity. That has forced these people to begin to address these issues. They don't really want to address them. They're still playing political games, but they are forced to because of the pressure of mass mobilization and anger against austerity. But we often don't recognize that power. And I can tell you that is the one thing that makes them fearful in there. And that they hope doesn't happen. And we have to understand that that is the power and potential we have to change these things. So I just conclude and say, it's only people power that makes a difference. We need people to get involved in building a political movement that believes these things have to change, and that the wealth and power have to be distributed, and that people power and mass mobilization is the way to do that. If you're interested in that, I would really encourage you to get involved. There's not enough of us, we're not big enough. We're getting bigger though, and we're starting to have a voice. But we need to get a lot bigger and a lot faster if we are going to decisively win these battles and change things. And Saturday week is also critical as a next step in putting the movement of people power back on the streets that can begin to hold these crazy guys to account.